Hello, Micah, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today to add your story and experiences on growing up in the Jehovah's Witnesses to the podcast catalogue. You've recently published your memoir, Mentally Diseased, which is available to purchase today, and I am looking forward to exploring the writing with you and with the listeners. Would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Hi, Casey. Yeah, my name is Micah Losh. Thanks for having me on.
We've talked a lot about the Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's always interesting to get different perspectives on people's experiences because the
Mhm.
blueprint for every congregation is exactly the same by design, but Kingdom Halls always look slightly different, and congregations are made up of completely different people, and they exist all over the world. So I think it would be really nice today if we could start by going over a brief history of the organization. I don't think I've done that for a while, even though there's been a few episodes on this subject that I've done recently. So would you mind giving us, as you understand it, a brief history of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
Yeah, I think it was the late 1800s. It began as the Bible student movement. And of course, I was born into it, and I really was isolated from everybody who didn't share my faith. But one of the things it, they rely on certain dates, but it's also they have this theory of new light where anything they have, if they predicted Armageddon, which they have numerous times, they always excuse it and say, well, that's old light, which means that was our current understanding of scripture at the time. So a lot of the publications that I grew up with are antiquated, or we got new songs sometime after, I think it was around maybe 2010. And it's odd because I'm 40, but in that time I saw so much change because when I was a kid, anything similar to televangelism was despised. And then they came out with JW.org and really got into that. And they started making maybe sometimes they kind of come close to Christian rock and making these music videos and just I really watched it morph into something that I don't recognize, but my brain was shut off, so I rationalized like, oh, well, yeah, we're getting closer to God, and but why would God mislead his true followers? I never that's just one of many questions that I never had in my head.
You mentioned that this was something that you were born into.
Hmm.
So do you have any recollection of how your parents or how their parents became involved? And did your parents meet inside or outside of the Jehovah's Witnesses?
So my parents they met at the swimming pool in their apartment complex. My mom told me that she thought my dad looked really angry, which that's just a genetic thing because I always am hearing that. But they met in the 70s, and I was born in 82 in December. So in between that time, I think I know they met Jehovah's Witnesses. I don't know if they came to their door. No one else on either side of the family was a Jehovah's Witness. My mom told me that my parents were baptized simultaneously, and the following year, the organization said it needs to be one at a time because it's a personal decision. And I've tried to find online, I've even asked on Reddit and Twitter, and nobody really knows an exact year. I don't think it's written down anywhere. But what really troubles me about that is in 1975 at a convention, Jehovah's Witnesses, they said stay alive until 75. paraphrasing, but a brother from the stage said, shower this dying world in magazines during these last few months. People gave away their savings, quit their jobs, and then there was, I don't know exact numbers, but quite a few people left because that was just the final straw for them. So I don't know if my parents joined before that, after it, as it was happening, and I can't ask now. But I believe somebody just knocked on their door.
I don't know that I've heard anybody talk yet about how their families were not involved at all, and that parents became involved together after having kind of no um pre-exposure to the witnesses or another high demand religious group before that. Typically it's one family is involved and they convert the other spouse,
Mhm.
and then they can be together once the other spouse is converted, or there's a long lineage of family involvement, making yourself sort of like a third or fourth generation Jehovah's Witness. So I'm not sure that
Yeah.
I've heard anything similar to your story before. And from some of the writing that I've read from your new memoir, Mentally Diseased, it sounds as if your mum at least threw herself into the Jehovah's Witnesses with everything that she had. Would you say that that's a fair assumption?
Yes, and kind of my view is, now my mother, when my mother was 5, her mother died of breast cancer. When my mother was 37, her twin brother died of brain cancer. Um, when she was a girl, she had a 9-year-old sister who died and a 14-year-old sister who died. I believe one of them was killed by rheumatic fever. My father was a child of 7. He was abused in every way imaginable. And even at one time, they lived in Brooklyn, Indiana, which I've never been there, but everybody who has says there's a giant dump. And my dad lived in that dump as a child. The whole family did. My dad spoke about rats crawling over him, biting him at night. I'm sure he went to bed hungry. And one thing Jehovah's Witnesses do is prey on vulnerable people. Even within, I think it was the last 10 years, they told people to go to graveyards, and when somebody is mourning, push propaganda on them. I know Jehovah's Witnesses, even my mother, who will go through the obituaries and write letters to people who've just buried someone they love. It is a insidious, predatory cult, and I think that my parents came from such horrible trauma that the message they offered was appealing. And I mean, I really don't know any of my family on either side. My mother pretty much cut off her side of the family. We would maybe see some of them once a year. And my dad came from um, such an abusive environment. I very rarely saw those people too. So all I had was my parents and the congregation. Everyone in my life reinforced this belief, and that was very powerful to me. But outside of their traumatic childhoods, I can't imagine why they would join.
Your mother grew up surrounded by constant grief and heartbreak.
Yeah.
I think that that must do something to the mind, and make you question, almost put you in a place of existentialism, questioning your own kind of life and how long you might be here for, and
Mhm.
how many more people might you lose. Is there a specific doctrine or teaching that the Jehovah's Witnesses have that might help calm some of those thoughts that your mum might have been having around her eternal soul?
Absolutely, because the resurrection after um, Armageddon, they believe, the world will be restored to a paradise earth, and your dead loved ones will be resurrected. Uh, that's after my father's death. That's what kept me tethered to the religion. I wanted my dad back, and I believed that was the only avenue there was. And I tolerated, I it's really difficult because I feel like you cannot grieve when your dead loved one is essentially dangled before you like a carrot, because you always think Armageddon is imminent. So you can't process or deal with anything because you're always thinking, well, tomorrow it could happen. And even when I was a child, I prayed at night for my God, Jehovah, to bring an end to his enemies. But what that meant was him committing genocide against 99% of the population. And I knew it meant him killing everybody at school, just everyone everywhere. And you're okay. I mean, you're okay with it because you ask. I mean, you're afraid, you don't want to be murdered, but um I mean, for me, my mindset was, even if it meant the death of billions, I was fine with it because I wanted my father back. It's a selfish, ugly admission, but it's true.
Well, you're a very vulnerable individual at that point, though, who is susceptible to influence and certain messages during those developmental stages, that if you are told that there is a way for you to have your father back, I don't think it's I don't know. I think it's only natural for you to perhaps consider wanting those events to play out. If you truly
Yeah.
believed, because you're being taught that there is a way to reconnect with your father. I remember Erica Bourneman, who wrote a memoir called Mission of Malice. She was talking about how her father passed away when she was young, and they were really, really close. And the leader of her abusive Christian mission came straight to her and told her that the only way that she will be reunited with her father is if she confesses every sin. And so she had to sit there with this person immediately after her father passed away and make things up, which is, a sin in itself because she's not telling the truth,
Yeah.
because this person wouldn't accept that she, wasn't a sinful person. I can't, how traumatic that must be for a child to have the passing of a loved one and then also to have to go through these motions. It feels like I think I said it was akin to sort of like relationship or family hostage taking. They're holding
Mhm.
your relationship with your father hostage to further their own agenda in terms of making you deployable in the church. And that is, as you said, it's insidious, it's despicable, really. You're a vulnerable individual.
Yeah.
And then, people wonder why people leave, even though they have the horrible shunning policies and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, so there's a clear there's a clear message that might have been attractive for your mum. And then on your father's side, there's the promise of, in Jehovah's Witnesses, of family and community, and everybody is a brother and everybody is a sister. Do you think that maybe this might have been what was sort of attractive for your father?
Maybe. I know that my dad, he was a mail carrier. He would work part-time jobs. I mean, we grew up pretty well off, and then even uh but my dad always helped you. I remember one night he brought a woman home. Her car had broken down on the highway, this young girl, and I remember the girl looked like, I think like she was just in a desperate situation. So she took a ride, and then when she came in and saw his wife and son, and I remember waving at her. She kind of looked relieved, because she was just stranded back before cell phones. But my parents were both that way, and I remember my dad telling me it's important to stand up for people who aren't as strong as you or whatever. But and another thing that reinforced my belief is, as my father was dying, he had cancer and a rare kidney disease called IgA nephropathy. So he was on chemotherapy, and they couldn't really like localize it like they do now, you know. So the radiation, it just he aged like 40 years. He was 47 when he died, but that year he just looked 90, you know. And they offered my dad a blood transfusion, which of course is, you know, persona non grata, and he refused it. And, you know, would it have saved him? Probably not, but would it have maybe given me a few more weeks or days, hours? Maybe. But he didn't even try. He died loyal to God. And I hated God for that because, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, they teach time and unforeseen occurrence, anytime anything bad happens, but then they will also cherry pick events and say, oh, we see Jehovah's hand in this. I remember once there was like a tropical storm and all this sand showed up where they needed it for this construction project on this island and they couldn't get it. But worldly people died. Well, that didn't matter, you know, because they're Armageddon fodder anyway. They didn't even address that. They just said, you know, God can move sand, but he didn't save my father. And I always knew that scripture, God will not give you more than you can handle, or that saying. I would hear things like that and just they were repugnant to me, and I really began to resent God. But due to my training, that was my sin, my imperfection. How dare I be angry at God? And I really began to hate myself.
I'm really sorry, Micah, that you lost your father at such a young age. I can't imagine how much that must have affected you, but also your mother as well, who's experienced so much loss through cancer as well in her life. It's it's a horrible thing to lose close family members, but with children, it's a whole other thing. And
Yeah.
I think it's really difficult to untangle your commitment to the Jehovah's Witnesses that almost becomes a non-commitment through the passing of your father. So it's like a thing to untangle, isn't it? Which I know is, you know, part
Yeah.
and parcel of writing a memoir and exploring all of these things. And in the early chapters of the book, um, whereas some of this you just mentioned your training kicked in the early chapters of the book. I think there is some evidence of this training starting really early on for you, because through your child eyes, we're able to see that you're already a devoted Jehovah's Witness from a young age. So I wondered
Mhm.
if you could talk the listeners through how that was able to happen, what that was like for you as a child, and those differences between yourself and perhaps worldly children that you were not able to connect with.
Yeah, well, so I never wanted to go to school. I remember when I was I went to kindergarten when I was 6 because I was born in December. But you know, you were told you were no part of the world. And not only that, you have to make a stand for God. So you're going into school knowing there is going to be a giant target. You know, I did not stand for the pledge. And essentially, you have to be fearless because if you deny God, he'll deny you. And also, if I have, oh, well, what they tell the children is school is your territory. So if I have life-saving information, you know, like if God spoke to me and said, "Oh, everyone wearing a hoodie is going to be killed," I would be like, "Hey, maybe you should change your shirt." You know, like why would you not try and save people's life if you can? But you're hated because they're celebrating birthdays and you're not, and also you're told every opportunity you need to take a stand. So I would say, well, I don't celebrate birthdays because, and I would go further, because God doesn't believe. And it just, it's horrific. I hated going to school. I would cry on my knees, pleading, and I would tell my parents, even as a kid, I tried to rationalize. I'm like, you were not Jehovah's Witnesses. You don't know what it's like. Please. I even said, I would go to, like, I would preach full time and do homeschooling. But I was never allowed to not go, and it's just awful because it, there's 10 million things you're going to hear. You can't say, God bless you. You can't curse. You can't tell dirty jokes. You can't watch art movies. So every time you're hearing these things, there's essentially a gun to your head, because you're thinking, okay, if I don't try and help them and save them, I'm going to be blood guilty and Jehovah will kill me. And it's really psychotic to think that those thoughts existed in my head as a 6-year-old, because it's overwhelming now to think about feeling that. And that's probably why I have almost barely any memories before I was 13. I would say maybe 10, and several of them are just quick flashes of things. I don't know if it's because it wasn't memorable, because it was perpetual deja vu, or if it's just a trauma response and my brain doesn't want me to remember it.
Sometimes when I talk to people who have experienced a high demand religious group, or a strict set of religious teachings that means that they don't join in with things like Christmas celebrations, Halloween celebrations, birthday parties, they'll always say, I had to step out of the class and it was me and one other kid who was a Jehovah's Witness. Do you remember anybody else in the school with you that didn't participate in any of those things, or was it just you as an individual?
So there was, when I was young, no. And then I do remember there was one girl in my class, but I mean, it seems she was born without a personality. I mean, I say that as politely, like, just, and she never really interacted with me. But also, after my father died and I had depression, that kind of indicates that you're not good enough. So, as a Jehovah's Witness, I was always an outcast, but then even among the outcasts, I really was a pariah. So the memories I have of that there was just this growing rift and divide among me and other Jehovah's Witnesses. So very rare. Sometimes we would go to the library. I do remember once, a few of us, but yeah, I mean, school was very lonely.
People talk often about the us versus them mentality that is implemented in high demand groups to reinforce the connection of followers to the leader, or
Mhm.
of followers to the doctrine. And I think that sometimes it's important to highlight the emphasized us versus them that happens internally. I think there's a good case of that here, where with the foreword of your book, there's a segment from an individual who wrote about remembering you in the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Yeah.
wondering why everybody saw you in such a bad way, especially after you left. After leaving the Jehovah's Witnesses, it's easier to understand, if you know the teachings, why there would be a certain rhetoric around, oh, Micah's this person and Micah's that person, and we don't associate with Micah because he has, he's left Jehovah behind, and whatever
Mhm.
ways the group might word it. But you're talking about actually feeling that us versus them divide when you were inside the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh yeah, all Jehovah's Witnesses are equal, but some are more equal than others. I mean, the women, it's really, another a friend I've made in the past couple years, Natalie Grand. She wrote a comic book called Cult Girls. Very supportive, really sweet lady. And when I was reading it, and I spent 37 years in this, but it never fully registered to me like how many girls, little girls that I made feel inferior, just thinking I was, doing what I was supposed to do. You're running mics, you're giving talks, and the women, they have to cover their head if they pray in front of you. And I even remember one time we were meeting for service, and uh, there's like a 40-some-year-old woman, and I'm 15, and I had to like pray and direct the service, very uncomfortable because you're obviously an adult. I'm But there's that, and then there's also, you know, if you're not happy, then that really equates evil. Even though they say Jehovah is close to the depressed hearted one and all this, it's not true because um, you're living the best life ever. They even have stickers and all kinds of merch now with that. Um, you're serving the happy God, even though if you look in the Bible at God, he seems bipolar and, he's like a complete sociopath. So if you're not perfectly reflecting that, you are evil. And I started to hear be told I needed to get over my father. People didn't know why it affected me so much. I even remember at my dad's funeral, someone told me, I know how you feel. And I looked over and I saw their father talking. Mine's in a box. You don't know anything. I've always hated when people say that just has always stuck with me because, I mean, it just, but it's such a toxic culture because if you're not happy for a prolonged period of time, then you are really just assumed to be evil and you're pushed out. And um and I was always a tad rebellious. I have 19 tattoos. I think I got all of them while I was going to meetings or trying, and I would wear short sleeves. I just thought and they cherry pick, the women can't, the women have to dress modest, but like I would get called into meetings for wearing all black too much. Why are you wearing black? It's my favorite color. And but there's nothing wrong with that, but they nitpick you to death. Or I mean, I used to have long sideburns. I mean, they were ridiculous, like down to my jawline. And I kind of spiked my hair. Well, that get called into the back room. Then when I start shaving my head, well, why are you shaving your head? And they'll, like I said, they'll just cherry pick because certain unhealthy habits are okay. And then other things, they just have to be criminalized. And if you don't, you just have to conform. It's like some people call the organization the Borg, like in Star Trek. And it's true because a lot of it's even funny when I watch YouTube videos, certain ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, I know who they are. Some of them, I know exactly their life. They wore khaki suits. They were popular. Their grandparents and aunts and uncles, they were all in, and they had this great life and then other people were just degenerate pieces of trash that no one talked to or acknowledged. And I experienced that for decades. Sorry, I ramble.
No, that was a really great example of how the us versus them mentality it's not exclusive. I'm sorry, it's not exclusive to us worldly people and us as witnesses. It's not exclusive to that because it happens in hierarchies and layers inside high demand religious groups as well. With gossiping and with people looking down on others, and with the whole the almost the total surveillance of people kind of offering information on others and spying on people. And as you said, it's not everyone is equal, because these layers and of I know that there is an actual hierarchical structure,
Yeah.
but it it's there's like a social hierarchy as well inside these
Oh,
these types of groups.
Absolutely. And you in certain congregations, they say that they'll be like, oh, what we're learning in America is what we're learning in the UK and in Zimbabwe, and it's just perfect and equal, but it's not. I've attended a few congregations long term, and even among those congregations, I saw differences in how it was run. And, because they speak about conscience matters, because all, non-believers will pretty much be killed. Now, the wages sin pays are death. So if you're murdered at Armageddon by God, he can resurrect you and then you can serve him forever. But also, just being a Jehovah's Witness, being baptized, does not guarantee your survival. So you're not only constantly trying to analyze yourself. I remember one time I dropped a can on my foot and I cussed. And then as I'm laying in bed, I'm like, well, was that like what if Armageddon comes tomorrow and I cursed and I'm this much further away from Jehovah and I get killed? But you also in the congregation, you're always trying to be good enough for them too. And it's exhausting. And it, it's just really perverse. You're kept so busy and so afraid, you can never stop and think, do I really believe this? Or is it just horrible? Is it making me miserable? Because once you buy into that, the immortality, I do think that is what keeps most people there. You also have the people with large families and the shunning, and they do foster codependency. Because in my congregation, there was a brother who had a business. Well, he employed half the elders and all the, like, I don't know, guys who looked like Hollister model. I mean, just like if you looked a certain way or you had, like, in my opinion, terrible taste in clothing and music, you were in the get along gang. But like me, I like heavy metal and black and muscle cars. So I'm a piece of garbage. And it, it's just crazy that I believed, that I could go to Russia and it would be exactly the same. I really bought into that, but it's not true. It's not even true. Some buildings have multiple congregations that meet, and there's just differences. You will have certain things will be okay, and also elders display favoritism to their children. I mean, one person, oh, I looked at pornography. Well, you need to be disfellowshipped. But then their daughter has slept with half the congregation and never got in trouble. It hypocrisy is rampant. It's just like any clergy.
You grew up without conforming to the I don't know, you'd say the
Well,
modesty aesthetic.
it was like, I mean, I guess maybe I was always a contrarian, a bit of a rebel, but just certain things seemed real stupid. Well, for me, like, now after my dad died, I started eating a lot, and by the time I was 18, I weighed 300 pounds. Now, one of the things, they tell overweight people wear all black. It's slimming, so I like to wear black, But it was always like I remember I got called into a meeting, and they're like, "Why are you wearing black so much?" And I'm like, "Because I like black." And there I'm like, show me in the Bible where it says the black is related to Satan or evil. If Jehovah created all the colors, I'm like, we have black people here. So, and they're like, oh, I would kind of push the envelope and be like, are you offended by that? And then they'd be like, well, that's disrespectful. But I would ask kind of absurd questions to prove my point, which I think is part of my being raised. Jesus spoke in parables and illustrations. So I would just make really absurd or mildly offensive ones. But I remember I told one guy, I said, and of course, homosexuals deserve death. And Jehovah's Witnesses believe that. But I told him, I said, you dress very, very gay. Like you look like a gay man, and pastel floral colors. And it's like, but I don't project that on you or accuse you of being gay. I mean, so it's like, so why am I in trouble for wearing dark colors? Because what does that mean about anybody? If you're a decent, it's just they're so focused on that. And another problem in this society is, um, a lot of people are really morbidly obese, and they even will go so far as to say, what is like physical health is good for some things, but spiritual health, whatever, is good for far more. So, some people are really kind of mistreated for exercising, taking care of themselves because they can have this perfect body and life in the new system. But it's just weird because you'll have people who, and I mean, if you go to the congregations, a lot of times the handicap seating, it's just people who are 4, 5, 600 pounds, which is not healthy, and nothing said about that. Even though if you read the Bible, I mean, whether or not it's gluttony, I remember one time they said it's not about if you're eating too much or if your health is bad, it's about your opinion towards food. They said, like, are you missing meetings to eat? Which is really perverse. Because I knew people who had some really bad health problems, were on oxygen at a young age. They didn't care that their health was bad. Are you coming to meetings? Are you giving us money? Are you proselytizing? It's just, but you're gonna flip out about somebody wearing black clothing. It's nonsensical, and you can't. The house always wins. I tried so many times for years to like have reasonable discussions, but it was always, I'm a complete piece of garbage because I'm not like how you want me to be.
The message of family and community, of helping people, the values that your father had and held, that from the outside looking in is what the organization itself sells people,
Mhm.
is not the reality that you were living once your father had
Mhm.
passed away. I think that's really kind of heartbreaking in itself, isn't it? Because it was never the organization that he thought it was, and the way that you're being treated is never how he would have wanted you, I imagine, to be treated.
Yeah, and he martyred himself for them. Watchtower killed my father in my mind. Yes, he was dying of cancer, but he did not pursue every avenue available to him, and I needed my father. And you know, uh, I don't, yeah, I don't know what to do with that. And he's not the only one. There are children. Even after he died, my mom, 3 years later, my mom had breast cancer. Um, she had her thyroid removed. She had cysts cut out of her arm.
Oh,
She had like, I think, 7 or 8 surgeries in like the decade following his death. And every time that happened, I mean, she was all I had, and the congregation didn't like me, didn't want me. So that was just very difficult. I became very suicidal, and I miss my dad, which it got to a point where that was like criminalized. I should be over it, and I didn't understand. And then my mom's having all these issues, and a lot of times and I didn't mind, but I would come home at night and she's recuperating, so I would check on her, maybe bring her some food, and people from the congregation would help too. But I was just worried that she would die as well.
help that the congregation was giving to your mother, this is something that I've always struggled with. It's conditional on her remaining within the organization. Do you think she would have still received that help from her fellow congregants if she said that she was no longer going to be a practicing Jehovah's Witness?
Oh, of course not. I know she wouldn't have. I've experienced that. Um, they do not care at all. Um, they do not care what happens. It is all about bringing people in. And it's very difficult because there are only a handful of people I mean, I can count on one hand how many people I miss that are Jehovah's Witnesses. And I feel ambivalence because the pain and the anger and the mistreatment, but I also know they didn't know any better. And I don't think I did. I mean, there were people I loved who were disfellowshipped when I was young, and I didn't speak to them. I, I thought that's the way it was. I thought that was God's plan. And even though a lot of times I was like, I'm sitting there thinking this is the best God can do, you know, but when you've been conditioned to think that that's your sinful inclination and that's your rebellious spirit, because you were born imperfect and that's how Satan is, you have those thoughts, but you dismiss them almost as quickly as they come in. And they can reside in your head, but for me, I just never analyzed them. I never seriously considered everything because it's survival oriented. You're told you're involved in a life-saving work, and you have to be constantly moving. They even tell you do not become self-satisfied, and they set people up for failure because there's only 7 days, 24 hours in each day, but they act like you need to have exponential growth. Well, it doesn't happen, especially if you get married or you have kids or God forbid, have hobbies. You just don't have the time. So it's just impossible to exist and not hate yourself, whether or not you know it. You just do.
And that creates the inner turmoil that you were talking about before, where it's a battle between being happy, but in your mind you're not happy, which you're then associating as being sinful, and then trying not to do that, which is deepening the issues with ill mental health. That is for an individual to kind of go through internally, I imagine very difficult, especially when you're still trying to commit yourself to the
No.
organization.
Yeah, and so my father died in 1996. Less than 4 months later, at the age of 13, I was baptized. Now, you look at your brain, your prefrontal cortex, which is involved in decision making, is fully developed at 25. What did I know about my life? I was 13. For all I could have been gay. And then if I realize that after I'm baptized, I'm going to get disfellowshipped. So they encourage child baptism. They want that because it's a hostage situation at that point. If you have somebody that you love, you there are all kinds of people that are just trapped in it. I mean, I've talked to them online. They're called PMOs, physically in, mentally out, which I cannot imagine the terror, the constant paralytic terror you would feel constantly wondering if you're going to be outed. I just can't imagine that. It must be, it's like they're a secret agent almost, because, and it's tattletale culture, because if you and I are in the congregation and you've done something bad and I know it, well, then I share in your sin and God will kill us both. So, they can turn married couples against each other. They can turn families, children. It, your emotions are weaponized. I always think of, have you ever seen The Green Mile?
Yeah.
When he abducts the two little girls and he says, if you say anything, I'm going to kill her, and if you say anything, I'm going to kill your sister. That's what they do to Jehovah's Witnesses. It's just, you think you think it's like real life and death because you can live forever, and it stops you from thinking. You're just obedient and you're survival oriented, and it's a hamster wheel.
It's everything you've said combined with the previous conversations that we've had around being so busy and not having a chance to sit still and wondering if you're being perfect, and then wondering if other people are being perfect, and then if they're not, then you need to do something about that. It's everything, isn't it? And it's designed that
Yeah.
way to stop you from being able to take a step back and say, how come how come how come women have to wear veils, and or whatever thing you want to
Yeah.
pull out,
Or
how come my father didn't want to accept a blood transfusion?
yeah, it's like they say, JWs say they're living the best life ever, while at the same time they say this isn't the real life is paradise. Well, you can't have it both ways. But you know, I feel like that slogan came out about 10 years ago, maybe, and I never questioned it. I never once. It was within the last year I was like, wow, what cognitive dissonance I maintained, because those things completely contradict one another. But it's all about illusion, and Jehovah's Witnesses are very, very fake, and they're circumscribed and contrived, especially if you're born in. You're really not allowed to fully develop, because there are parameters, and you can only come up to those edges, and if you step out, then you'll be expelled. And just some of the fakest people I've ever
Yeah.
spent time,
But you've mentioned going towards those parameters though, and being treated differently for that, not adhering to dress codes or or attitude, which I'm saying in air quotes that people can't see, but I'm, in regards to ill mental health, depression, difficulties with suicidal ideation. Your attitude is being looked at as something that's a problem for the Jehovah's Witnesses,
Mhm.
something that shouldn't be happening. If you were a good Jehovah's Witness, you wouldn't be feeling this way. It's cognitive dissonance, again, in so many different ways. But when you mentioned the physically in, mentally out individuals who are like double agents, I feel like every single person in a high demand religious group is living double lives. There's the person that they are when they're in the congregation, like a facade that they present to other
Oh yeah.
people. And then there's like oh, actually, do you know what, let's watch Harry Potter when we get home, but not tell anyone that we're watching Harry Potter when we get home. And I think even the people that are the most devout individuals to their respective religious groups do some things that would be deemed
Oh,
as sinful. I don't know how you
well,
can be as perfect the
oh,
as the teachings expect you to be.
yeah, I mean, you can. They set you up for failure, 100%. And every time you fail, it instills guilt in you, and that just keeps feeding the cycle. Because I mean, you're right. I remember one time I was talking to elders about listening to Ozzy Osbourne, and afterwards, an elder told me, he said, "Oh, I listen to Ozzy. I just don't talk about it." And I said, "Well, you're fake, and you're a hypocrite, and I don't respect that." And I, but for me, of course, then I was judgmental and arrogant, and I needed to be humbled before Jehovah. And yeah, but you're right. Even the most devout, everybody makes mistakes, but very few people want to obey all those rules.
I can't remember who it was exactly, told me a story about their family had their TV set on like a a stand on wheels. So if anyone ever knocked on the door, they could quickly wheel it out of the living room
Yeah.
so no one would see it. And I always think about things like that really make me laugh, because you could just imagine it it's
Well,
not funny in the moment, because there are dire consequences to things like that, but the whole family sitting around watching the telly and then being like, quick, move the telly. And the
yeah.
people knocking on the door probably have their own version of that in their own home.
Yeah. Well, and you have the hard fast rules, but then you have all these conscience matters. Like I couldn't eat Lucky Charms because luck isn't real. I couldn't like some of the really old Disney movies with magic I couldn't watch, but then I could watch Lord of the Rings. Because and then my mom's like, "Oh, well, you're older now," because I was 18 when the first one came out. But still, magic is condemned in the Bible. And Lord of the Rings is filled with it, but it's ridiculous. My mom would show me like the old Bela Lugosi Dracula films or The Werewolf with Lon Chaney, I think. And then she'd be like, "Oh, we shouldn't be watching these," or Dracula drinks blood and blood is sacred, so anything with a vampire is evil. It's just absurd rules, let alone, children are being abused. And that's not a matter for concern at all. And there are all these real world problems and people suffering, but they're fixated on entertainment and sexuality and just I think the name of the game is just guilt and shame. And if you think that your desires are sinful, I mean, they have you.
Controlling every aspect of an individual's life, isn't it? How they dress, what they watch, what they do in leisure time, how much money they commit, how much time they commit. It's all of those
Yeah.
staples of what constitutes a cult, as defined by experts who have put material out in the world that allows us to understand those things. So when people ask me, what do you think makes up a cult, I always say, how difficult is it to leave? Because
Yeah.
if you can't just walk away and there be no consequences, then I think that there's something that needs to be discussed. So with the Jehovah's Witnesses, these people that are physically and mentally out are most likely in those positions because if they have been baptized and they leave, they are not going to be able to have communication with anybody still remaining in the organization. And that, to some people, as you've mentioned, could be everybody that they've ever known.
Yeah. Well, and also, they teach you that, what the meek shall inherit the earth. You need to be humble. And they really do make it where you're concerned what people think about you. So if you're baptized and you leave, you are called an agent of Satan. You are called despicable. Members are told to resist your gangrenous speeches. And you're also called mentally diseased, which is why I named my book what I did. But, I know people that left and I thought they served Satan. And I averted my eyes when I saw them. And I have it done to me now at my job. Jehovah's Witnesses frequent my job a lot. And I can feel them staring at me. They're not subtle. And then when I turn, they look um and of course I have my I have my mother's maiden name tattooed on the back of this arm and my last name here. So, if I'm washing dishes and they, they know me. I grew up with a lot of these people. Even I saw one of the elders who disfellowshipped me the second time and he didn't look at me. And I just yelled at him. I wouldn't look at me either. It's very I've talked to so many people at my job. I work with a lot of really supportive people. But this one guy, he said, I said, oh, I know that guy, can't stand him. He was always a jerk to me. And he said, well, you should just go up to him and be like, hey, man, I'm doing really good now. And I said, no, he thinks I serve Satan. And he goes, oh, but he doesn't really think that. And I said, he thinks I serve the dark Lord. As it's really alienating when you're talking to people and their face will shift. And it's like, oh, I should be on a ledge screaming like a lunatic at pigeons because I sound like a psychotic, but these are true things that I can prove on their website. And yeah, it's just it's a problem without a solution, honestly.
I was kind of hoping that you were going to say that you worked somewhere where there shouldn't be Jehovah's Witnesses frequenting the premises. Like you
Well,
mentioned all
I
your
mean,
tattoos. It would be so interesting if you like worked in a tattoo shop and just these people are coming in all
oh,
of the time. And
well, I
wouldn't
do
that be
work in a
something?
bar. Yeah,
Well,
I do work in a bar, which I mean, can you drink alcohol? Yes, but are bars a good idea for Jehovah's Witnesses? No. Even though
no,
it,
well,
it is,
you might have one drink, but as you said, you can't satisfy yourself. There's no self satisfaction, so you wouldn't
yeah.
binge drink, surely.
No, yeah, I just one night there were about 50 or 60 of them, just a bunch of them I grew up with, and they were all around the bar. And I could, when you can feel people looking at you, but it was every single one. And every time I turned, they'd all just look away. And it was so ridiculous. And I knew nobody else noticed. And I just, oh, yeah,
Like a
it's,
pantomime.
yeah, it's absurd. And it, I don't know, it really, it's crazy.
So you you experienced the loss of your father. Then you are soon after that, you're baptized. So now is that extra pressure, as you said, being held hostage or face the consequences of being disfellowshipped if you break one of the rules, or the elders in a jurisdictional meeting decide that you should be disfellowshipped. What does your journey look like after your baptism? You've mentioned you were disfellowshipped twice, so there has to be a time where you're disfellowshipped and then you are brought back in.
Mm,
And what did and you also mentioned that you've been a long time member of a number of different kingdom halls. So please paint that picture for us of your baptism and what your life in the Jehovah's Witnesses was like after that moment.
okay. So I grew up in the same congregation until I was 17. My father died. Well, he attended his last meeting at that congregation, and him and my mom actually helped build it during a quick build. So when I was 16, I got arrested for some vandalism. Stupid thing, not excusing it. Teenagers are notoriously dumb. But no one said, "Hey, this kid, his dad died 3 years earlier. Is he okay?" No, it was I had brought reproach on Jehovah, and so I was publicly reproved. And then, and what's really interesting is the worldly people, because I did this thing, met with people that we had vandalized their stuff. They were forgiving. The worldly people that I was praying to my God to murder forgave me. Jehovah's Witnesses didn't. So then I was kind of like marked. And then when I was 17, 18 almost, I told my mom, I said, I don't want to live anymore. I want to die. I've had enough. I mean, it was what, 5 years, but it, I just kept getting more and more alienated, and I was more and more depressed. I would go to the Kingdom Hall. People wouldn't look at me, wouldn't speak to me. I'd sit there for 2 hours and leave. And that was my life, because you can't have friends outside of it. So my mom said, well, let's have the elders talk to you. Well, they said, we're not going to talk to him. We think he just wants help. And I was planning to kill myself with a sword my mom had bought me for my 18th birthday. Or not my birthday, graduating high school. I'm sorry. So since being an elder indicates approval from God, divine approval, I interpreted that as God rejecting me. When his elders will not even speak to me, I don't know how, if you have faith, you could interpret that any other way. So my mom just said, I don't understand. So we moved to another congregation further south. Now, unbeknownst to me, when you go to a new congregation, they write a letter, but it's basically the elder can recommend and say whatever they want. And of course, I'm a piece of trash who's been publicly reproved and depressed. So it different people, but it was exactly the same. It's like they all had a conversation about me before I showed up. So yeah, I just started trying to kill myself. Over and over again. Not half-hearted. It wasn't that I told people beforehand. And of course I was, treated like a leper for that. I did actually, overdosed on something and I died in my house. They brought me back and I was in a coma for 37 hours. And so when I was 23, I dated this Jehovah's Witness who our Kingdom Hall shared two congregations, so she transitioned from one to the other. And I ended up getting disfellowshipped for, I didn't sleep with her, but I think it would be pornea is what they would say. And what's really ridiculous is I came to the elders with it. Nobody else did. And then they told me I lied, which I should have just lied to them. But yeah, so I got disfellowshipped for the first time for 18 months, I believe. Now, I lived with my mom, so she would speak to me, but she would not speak to me about spiritual things, even although sometimes she did. Like I I even remember when you have to write a letter to be reinstated. And I wrote, well, obviously I want to serve Jehovah because you people treat me like I don't exist. And the elders did not like that. So I Googled, how do I write a reinstatement letter? And I found like a template an apostate had put somewhere. And that's what, and I just copy and pasted it, and the elders loved it. They ate it out of my hand. And so I was like, okay, is this bullshit? But I never progressed beyond that. Like, because commute or, whatever, looked up apostate material, the worst thing you can do. I lied, and through you, Jehovah approved me to come back. But
So
so,
not lying gets you kicked out, and then lying gets you brought back in.
yeah.
And it's the same
And
as what Natalie told me, and actually the same as what Daniel O'Brien told me. Natalie's own father, who was an elder, told her how to write a reinstatement letter, which got her, reinstated
yeah,
after she was disfellowship for the first time. And Daniel O'Brien, he kind of knew how to write his reinstatement letter, so he did the same
yeah.
thing.
Well, and it's all about, you have to write this letter where, like, oh, woe is me, and I did not prioritize the feelings of my brother. Well, I don't really give a damn. Like, spare me. I don't. I mean, as long as you're not, really hurting people or something, I don't care what you do. You watched an R movie, I don't care. But yeah, so then I was back and I really tried. I remember I went to my previous congregation because there were two English speaking congregations and a Spanish one there. So I went to the other one, the other English speaking, and it was the same thing. I remember I went out in service and I knocked on a door, and I was with an elder, and I knock on the door, so possibly somebody's coming, and he goes, aren't you the kid with real bad emotional problems? And it was just like, I can't, why am I such a piece of trash for being sad that my father is dead? That's a reasonable reaction. And I just got defeated. And in my book there are massive jumps in time, and I did that because nothing happened. It was just perpetual deja vu. So when I was 33, I decided I was gonna kill myself. There'd been a couple suicides in my congregation. Nobody cared. No one ever cares. They don't ever say, hey, let's talk about mental health. It's always, that's what happens when you stray from Jehovah. God knows how many people Watchtower has killed through shunning and not accepting blood transfusions and just mistreatment of people. And I just knew that nobody cared. I had the evidence. I even one time I said, I'm gonna go a year without interacting and see if anybody reaches out to me, and nobody did. I mean, that's how much time I had, that I took a year. That's really pathetic, but it's true. And so my mom was like, talk to an elder. And it's just the same. Why? It's never any better. And so I told him that my plan, it was fail proof too. I had like a backup plan if the first method didn't kill me. And he just mocked me. He said, your life is easy. You have nothing to complain about. And the devastation, I can't, that just blew me away. And I told my mom, and she was like, well, wait on Jehovah, thought terminating cliche, platitudes, that's all I get. And he's an elder, he must have meant well. No, this is a cruel piece of trash. Who would say that to someone? And so I just started drinking a lot. I just decided to be drunk every day. I started going to meetings drunk. I really don't know how people didn't know. I think I drank in the Kingdom parking lot. Like I would be in there buzzing pretty good. And like, yeah, I mean, that was probably some of my most passionate singing at a meeting. But like, I like to drink, but that was the first when I was like, I don't, I can't continue. I can't deal with this anymore. I had no resources because every time I went to therapy, They said, leave this religion, which I always, oh, that's the world. So, and you can't tell a therapist, well, I can't give up the true religion and miss out on immortality, because you know how crazy that sounds. So it happened. A woman I worked with, we started talking about Jehovah's Witnesses. She had went to high school with one. Well, she started coming to meetings. She started bringing her son, and I fell in love with her, just absolutely, irrevocably. And so she was studying. Her and her son were spending a lot of time with my mom and I. Well, then the congregation, when they found out that she liked me, they really started to try and divide her from me, which broke my heart. And then I was told, you guys are spending too much time together. It's triggering the consciences of your brothers and sisters, the same people who ignore me for years at a time, who flat out don't care that I'm suicidal. They cannot handle that possibly so I was like, no, I refuse. So, and of course I was living with my mom. I gave my mom my money. I had medical debt. I gave almost everything to her, and you don't save money because Armageddon is imminent. So my mom tells me, because I said, this isn't scriptural. I would always say, what's the scriptural precedent for not wearing a black suit? There is none, so I don't care. Well, there's no scriptural precedent for that either. And so my mom said, you need to be out of here in like 2 days. Well, I had absolutely no one to help me. So I moved in with the woman that I loved. And I mean, I knew I would get disfellowship for that. So I went, I slept with her. And then so I was disfellowship for the second time. And they told me I should move out of her house into a homeless shelter. That's the compassion. Jehovah's Witnesses do not care at all. They are inhumane. Their humanity is just bred out of them. And I said no. I loved her son. So we eloped. And now then, how I was raised, people who aren't Jehovah's Witnesses, you don't interact with unless you have to, for work or school. So I had never met my, fiance and then wife's family. I'd seen her mom once at a baseball game. So she didn't want to tell her family that we had gotten married, because she got married or she was married when she was young. So maybe it was that, whatever. So she didn't tell her parents for over a year, which I did not handle well. And my drinking exploded exponentially.
It's more of
And
that
I
double
just,
double living, double life scenario.
yeah, well, I mean, I rejected immortality for this woman. Whether or not it was true, that's what I believed. You'd be hard pressed to find something more romantic than that. And then not,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just true. And then the fact that she won't tell her family, the only way I can interpret that is rejection. Now, today I would have been like, forget this, I'm divorcing you. But when you're a Jehovah's Witness, you can't get divorced unless immorality has occurred. So and when you're disfellowship, you're told you're cut off from Jehovah, so you can't pray to him. You have absolutely no support. I don't have my mother. I don't have friends. And the woman I love won't tell her, and it just broke me. And so I just started spiraling, drinking. I mean, when I was drinking 24 beer a night, then I went to vodka, and then vodka, like a bottle of that wasn't doing it. So then I was drinking bourbon, scotch, and it just went on for years and years. I was reinstated after 27 months. It was 2 years and some change, but yeah, because every time you're disfellowshipped, it's got to be longer than it was the first time. Like, I've never known of anybody who, was disfellowshipped 9 months and then another time disfellowshipped only 7 or something.
During this time where you are disfellowshipped, you went into the relationship with your girlfriend, then wife, knowing that you were going to be disfellowshipped, especially when you moved into her premises.
Yeah.
But you're still holding on to the belief that Jehovah's Witnesses don't get divorced, so you can't get divorced, even though you're not practicing at that point. The
Yeah.
the lifelong teachings and doctrine are ingrained into you at that point. So you're still living your life by that rule book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and then you're thinking, well, and then too, when you're the husband, you're the spiritual head. So if you're not teaching your family about Jehovah, he'll kill you and he'll kill your family. And we ended up we'd been married a little less than a year, and my as she got pregnant. So um, when my son was born, that was just another. It became very important to me because I never had anything other than my parents, and then my dad died. I wanted my son and my stepson because I never forbid my family, my wife or ex-wife and stepson from seeing their family, but I would tell them, well, this is what Jehovah says. You can do what you want, but no, I don't agree. And because you think they're choosing death, even though it's not reasonable, that's what you think. And so I guess, encourage them, but I would just try and apply scriptural principles. Like, Jehovah doesn't want you doing these things or celebrating. But I really wanted to be able to give my kids like a multi-generational family, and because I never had that. So I think that was part of it. And but I really I was seeing a lot of cracks because I was going to congregation A. Well, when I was disfellowshipped, we started going to congregation B, and things I had been told in one congregation were not told in the other. And so, same building, same small hick town, but I'm very clearly seeing that there is not this great hand at work making everything um, match up. It's not happening. So I'm really struggling, but I don't know. I didn't want to go back. I didn't miss it. I missed a few people and I missed my mother, but the lifestyle, none of that was missed. It was just, it's like, oh, well, now, because I've talked to numerous Jehovah's or XJWs where their parent will text them, they'll be like, you're killing your kids. That's a real thought that you think. It's not, let's have a birthday and celebrate life. You're murdering your child. And the moment I saw my son, I knew I would kill for him. I knew I would do anything for him. And the night he was born, he had respiratory issues. They flew him to the children's hospital. Now, I was disfellowship. My mom was there, but because my ex-wife had some complications, she couldn't leave the hospital. So as my mom's driving there, she tells me if they offer my newborn son blood, to deny him, even if he dies. My mother does not love my son. She tried to get me to martyr him for Watchtower the night he was born. They're just, that's not love. They're incapable of even understanding. But Jehovah's Witnesses are taught hatred, but they're told it's love. It's just like, when you have somebody who's racist and they take their kid and say, look at those filthy people. It's taught. You're just taught hatred. And when you buy into it as adults, like my parents did, I don't think you can be saved. But yeah, that was a really rough time.
Did the cracks manifest into your decision to walk away finally and leave the organization behind?
Well, so I didn't actually walk away. My drinking was just, I was drinking a lot, and it, going on pretty much for 7 years. I would say out of that time, it seems way more, but maybe 30 of those days I was sober. Maybe. I mean, I was waking up drunk. I was just always drunk. Um, I would do the things I needed to do, and then I just get blackout drunk because I just couldn't deal with my reality. And I never got over that elder mocking me. And I thought about him doing that to my stepson or my son, and just hatred began. So just growing inside of me. And when I talked about it, nobody cared. Nobody cared if people were killing themselves. So I confronted that elder. This was during COVID over the phone. And he said that he didn't say what he said, and he said another elder was there. Now, I had been on Reddit reading about people saying, they were molested and it was covered up, and when they came forward, so the fact that he would cover that up and get another elder to lie and say they talked to me in person, because he said we spoke in person and it was on the phone. So I hung up on him, and then he called me back, and I ended up threatening him with violence if he ever called me again. I was just I wanted nothing to do with him, and I knew where he lived. I didn't go and attack him. I just, the way he spoke to me, So it ended up I was banned from meetings. The elders called me. I thought they were going to disfellowship me over the phone, but they wanted me to apologize to him. And I said, so if I was raped, would you want me to apologize to my rapist? And they said, well, are you saying he raped you? I said, no, but like mocking someone who says, I'm desperate and want to kill myself is abuse. I'm not comparing the two, but why would you want me to apologize to him? Like, he's not a good person. Well, they told me I could attend meetings through Zoom, but physically coming to the hall after COVID would not be allowed. And my mother defended that decision. She blocked my number, and my drinking, yet again, that was another just jumping off point. And then in a blackout, I made a mistake and I wound up in jail. I grabbed my stepson, didn't let go of him, fell on him, terrorized him, and he called the police on me. Thankfully, I didn't do any permanent physical damage. But so I woke up in jail, and they had to tell me why I was there, or they told me my charges. I didn't even know who I had done it to. It could have been my little boy who was 2 at the time. And, it's, you can't take things back, but if I could take anything back, one thing in my whole life, it would be that. So I was in jail, and I reached out to my mother, because I don't know that many phone numbers. Who really does? And she filed a no contact order against me. Said she, painted me as a monster. I spent 77 days in jail. And I mean, the system threw me under the bus. I had a public defender who barely spoke to me. I didn't know anything really about legal issues. So I signed a plea bargain, but there was a no contact order with my stepson. So that, which I didn't realize that until it was in front of me, and I just wanted to see my little boy. At least I could see him. So I was homeless for 3 days. Now, while I was in jail, my car got repossessed. I didn't realize that. So I thought I could at least sleep in my car. And so I got out, and I had nowhere to go. No Jehovah's Witnesses cared that I was homeless in winter. I cannot, that I felt terror so profound. Like, I just don't even know if I ever even felt afraid up to that point or since. And I ended up getting into a sober living facility. And so you have to, most of the people in there have absolutely no self-control. For me, I had decided I'm not going to drink. I tried to get into a treatment facility. They said, you've been sober too long, over 30 days. Well, someone offered me hand sanitizer so I could eat it and say I'd relapsed and get admitted. But I had already promised my wife I would never drink again. I told her, if I ever drink again, don't ever let me see my stepson or my little boy again. And I meant that. And so I had dealt with the issue. I realize that now. But then when you have to surrender everything, which fine, all I've done is follow stupid rules in a cult my whole life. I can surrender my phone and my debit card, that's fine. I never got in any trouble there for breaking the rules. Like, I cleaned, I did my chore. But when I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings, which were mandatory, it felt very similar.
Yeah.
And in my brain, I said, okay, so there are fewer teeth, more tattoos, everyone's cursing. It's a completely looking demographic, but why does it feel so familiar? And so after I had been there, there were like numerous stages. in this group. So after the first one, you got your phone back because you could only make supervised phone calls, no internet access. And I really began researching Jehovah's Witnesses sober, because when I had looked before, I would get drunk because you really think, oh, I look at a website and it says something negative about Jehovah's Witnesses and there's demonic influence that will warp your mind. The fear is real. It's palpable. There were times I would turn, or toss a magazine. Oh my God. And then I began looking up, tactics that cults use. And I think I had a list of like 10 or 15, and even mind control used in like Chinese war camps during World War II. And it was just like reading my childhood. Every single step was done to me. It was mind blowing to me, and it really. And I even looked about how like there's an order to it. Once you get people to accept this one thing that this is the truth, or like imposing a double bind where now you know the truth, so if you don't obey it, Jehovah will kill you. But also, Satan isn't happy that you're learning the truth, so he's going to target you. And it was just like, wow, all of these layers started coming off. And then when I'm in AA, because I I believe AA is very much a cult too. I don't think it's as sinister or as well organized, but it has a lot of the markers, and it's all about God. Whether God with a capital G means the creator. And when I would question that, they'd say, well, you think too much. You're not open-minded. I'm like, well, you're not dealing in reality. This guy wrote this book. He knew what that word meant, And so that was kind of the process where it was a really slow, painful one for me. I really don't know if I wouldn't have been rejected and left to die on the streets if I ever would have seen through it. That's how thoroughly I was brainwashed. People underestimate the power of propaganda. Some people see through it. Some people say they see through it. Good for them. But I didn't. And it was funny when I reached out for them in my most desperate moment, they did not care. But then later, they invited me to the Zoom memorial that first year. And then a month before my book came out, my mom sent me a letter, bereft of emotion. I could write you a letter with more feeling in 5 minutes, inviting me to return to Jehovah. And also, it had a thing telling me it's likely I'll get cancer in the next decade, which is charming, based on all of the family history. Not, it even said contact people wherever you live. I mean, she sent it to this address, but if I would have got that in jail, I probably would have gone back. I can't say for sure, but it seems pretty plausible, but never. I mean, now I put out a book. I don't know if my mom knows about it or anything, but that's like the ultimate for me, just the rejection, stay away. I don't need that toxicity. I don't need that abuse. But yeah, I just don't know if under any different circumstances if I would have left, because I wanted to believe it was true, and I did believe it was true.
It's a pretty extreme set of circumstances that you had to find yourself in order to break away from that movement. And I think that really speaks to the stronghold that these religious groups have their members in, not just through the guilt and shame that you talked about, but also the cultivation of fear through, not being reunited with your father, or not having immortality, or finding yourself being murdered by the God that you've served your entire life on the day that they
Yeah.
decide to come back and carry out the end of the world. To lose that relationship with your mother, it's like grieving all over again for the loss of a parent.
Yeah.
It's very callous to send a letter to your child, just probably under the instruction of the elders.
Yeah.
I wonder if she's even being subjected to sort of mistreatment herself, because by association, your son has released it, or by association, I don't know if they tell her. She might have been encouraged to reach out to you, and told that if she can't get you to change your mindset or take back your words, then she might suffer consequences herself. And of course, this is just speculation because you're not in contact with your mother. But I think
Yeah.
that it's plausible that that sort of thing could be taking place.
It is. Now, their public stance is, of course, have nothing to do with these despicable apostates. And when, I was speaking out against, I mean, they claim 8.6 million members. Now you have PMOs, they could have inflated numbers, but to think that you are potentially an enemy of millions against what I don't know how much money Watchtower has, millions at least. That's a daunting thought, to publicly challenge these now 10 men recently. They just anointed two new members of the governing body. But my mother still babysits my stepson and son. Now, I haven't spoken to my stepson. I couldn't while I was on probation. I completed that quite a while ago, I think. I think it was last September. But like for me, it was like, well, I love my stepson very much. Now, of course, I kind of got painted as a monster, and then people were like, "Oh, you did that to him because he's your stepson and you didn't love him," which really is a load of crap. My ex-wife used to even tell me, she would say, "You prefer him to your own son," which wasn't true. Just my baby wanted nothing to do with me, and I have a tattoo, a portrait tattoo of my stepson. I don't have one of my little boy. Like I really fell in love with him too, and it was just it it could have just as easily have been a 2-year-old. And that was, for me, it's like, wow, my drinking has got out of hand, because that's not who I am. What? Like, I couldn't believe that I had done that. So I was like, well, I'll never do that again. Nobody cared. It all fell apart. But so my mom babysits them, and she's tried to get them to join. Now, my ex-wife doesn't want to be a member. My stepson doesn't. He's 13 now. But my son just turned 5. And I know that my mom will push that on. He's even told me she shows him propaganda cartoons. Now, the last time I tried to reach out to my mother, she filed a no contact order and, said things that just painted me as a monster. I go into that in my book. So there's really nothing I can do. I've been rebuilding my life, and I lost my car. I paid off 2/3 of my debt, but I was like, what happens if I die? I mean, I know about all this cancer history. I don't live in a great part of town. There are drug addicts and insane people everywhere. And it really was reprehensible to me to think about me dying and that same thing being done to my little boy, if you want to see your dad again. And so, but I also, who wants to challenge a cult? It's a burden. No one, I can't imagine most people really want to do that. And I was really struggling with what to do, because I was doing all this research about, and I had proven that I didn't believe it, and I found out all these things that I never learned about Watchtower, that were hideous to me. And this girl I worked with, this young girl, she just said, "What was it like?" And I don't know why it just registered with me that I was like, normal people have absolutely no idea what I've been through. And so I was like, maybe there's merit to this. And then when I told her, she was kind of like, oh, well, I know to stay away. And I put this evil out into the world. I proselytized for decades. So that was part of it. And also for my stepson, I wanted to do I felt like I failed him in an epic way. So how do I apologize in an epic way? And the biggest way I could think of is you write a book where you own your sins and mistakes. And I end the book with there's a letter to him and a letter to my little boy. And I feel like maybe that public form of apology, I mean, I'm kind of the mind where I just haven't reached out to him because I don't know what I would say. And I also, I don't know. I just feel like if he never wants to speak to me again, that's his right. That's his, prerogative. But I just wanted to help expose Watchtower. And I know that most people, when I was talking to in the XJW community, most of the people I was interacting with left under better circumstances than me. And so I just felt like I don't know, I felt I had to tell my story, I was anonymous online until the day it came out. I published it on my 40th birthday, which, for me, that was reclaiming that day. I'd never celebrated it before. And so I do know, like, as far as they do have apostasy trials, but if they have clear evidence that you're an apostate, they can disfellowship you in absentia. And of course, what they say now is, so and so is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't use the word disfellowshipped anymore from the stage, I think, for legal reasons. But I could be disfellowshipped for the third time. I don't know. I mean, I have no idea. So yeah, I mean, it totally could have been, but I don't think anybody really knew who I was. I find it ironic that it came out, or I received that letter on November 19th, and December 10th, my book came out. That was really close. So, but also, I don't know. I've been told by people there's a department in Watchtower, their headquarters, that like observes
Yeah.
apostates. And so I kind of like to think that like I'm on a list somewhere and they're like, oh, look, like I hope it pisses them off that you call me mentally diseased and that's what I'm going to call myself. Like I'm going to own that, you're not going to use that against me.
A
So,
book that details all the wrongdoings of an organization that claims to be perfect.
yeah, and it's there are a lot of different voices in the XJW community. Certainly, I think there need to be more female voices, but also, you have people that were gay or bisexual or that are, but they can't act on it, and they have to pray away that part of themselves. And they even, where I grew up, they would call people NPGs, non-practicing gays. Like everybody knew that they were gay, but they didn't act on it, so it was okay. And that must be really horrible to be praying away a part of yourself. And I don't know, it's been cool since it's come out. I've had a few people reach out to me, but I really hope that, more people will be encouraged to share. Because, I mean, I feel like a big part of my story is just the grief and the depression and how it's criminalized. And I mean, just how this organization failed me at every single major point in my life when I needed them. And I mean, it even made my mother, I don't want to say she's a failure as a mother, but you abandon your child every single time they need you. You even condone the abuse, the mental torture from these people. And you know, she doesn't know any better. It doesn't do anything to make me less angry. But it's really difficult because sometimes I see XJWs talking about, well, how can I wake up my sister or my cousin or whatever? I don't really think you can. I think people are tethered to this religion by something so unique, and more often than not, it is, paradise or the resurrection. But I don't know. I feel like some people, you have people that were in like, maybe doing hardcore drugs and then they become a Jehovah's Witness and they're like, my life is better. But you also have people that, if they were like, my mom just turned 70. If she was to wake up, would she really be better off, to realize her husband's never coming back? She's never gone on a date since the day he died. She expects to be his platonic friend in paradise because resurrected people can't get married. And you've shunned your son. And I mean, I don't even know how. I don't feel like our relationship could ever be repaired, honestly. I would never trust her. It's almost like she's replaced me with my son. You know, some of the things he tells me that she sings with him or does with him, that's what she used to do when I was a kid. You don't care about your son because you're okay with God murdering him if he doesn't serve him. Yet again, problems without solutions. I don't know.
There's a something I've been reading recently by John Atack about doctrine over self. If anybody listening is really wondering how an individual can walk away from their family, from their own child, in the name of their chosen deity, God, figurehead, doctrine over self is a really great way of explaining how that has happened. So I think just researching that could help people to understand, how your mum has chosen Jehovah's Witnesses over her own child. Um,
Yeah.
One question I did have that I don't know if we'll be able to have a discussion or if you'll be able to answer it, but do you feel like your mental health has improved since you've been able to begin deconstructing your experiences with Jehovah's Witnesses? Or do you think that your journey towards improved mental health is something that you will always be working on?
Well, it's difficult because, of course, I used to get my mom would call the police on me because I would say, I don't belong to the true religion, so I deserve death because I'm not happy. And that belief existed in me from the age of 13 to well over 33. So, over 20 years. And I have gone to therapy in the past year. Um, I've just never I've never enjoyed, not enjoyed, that's not the right word. I've never really gotten much from therapy, and it's probably because it was weaponized against me as a child. But I don't take antidepressants now. I don't um, go to therapy, but I cannot remember a day in my life I didn't want to die. And sometimes I just feel it's just existed so long that it's just a part of me. And it's frustrating because it not so much therapists really, like when I was going to therapy, they said, I haven't touched alcohol since the day I woke up in jail. I said I wouldn't. I'm a man of my word. And she was like, well, you're not drinking, that's good. She was really like, I don't want to say impressed, but she thought it was very positive I was writing a book. um yeah, I don't know if that'll ever go away. I wouldn't encourage other people to harm themselves or in their lives, but I certainly, what all the things I would say to comfort them and stuff, I don't say to myself, and I really don't believe when anybody says to
Right.
me. It's really hard when you have factual proof that absolutely everyone you love doesn't care if you lose absolutely everything. You live in a disgusting, filthy place with drug addicts where you're abused and told I mean, the mental abuse there was horrific. And just, I don't know. As far as mental health, I mean, I don't drink. Whether or not it's better, it's obviously better, but is it good? I would say no. I've lived with agony for so long. It's just there. I don't yeah, I don't know. You know, I don't know if that's a good answer. It's an
Well, it's a
honest one.
true answer. Yeah, it's a true answer. I mean, I guess I thought the answer to the improving your mental health would be leaving the organization behind. But I think maybe that's my rainbow answer.
Well,
That's the ideal result, isn't it? But of course, ill mental health is such a complex thing that it's not as simple as, oh, a lifetime of being subjected to coercive control and of receiving no support with ill mental health, which is just increased and been exacerbated over time isn't answered with a simple, oh, leave the church and then everything will get better. And I think that that's a lesson that I need to understand. It's probably a good lesson for the listeners as well. But it is a hard truth, because of course I'd love to think that there's a way that you could not feel those things that you feel.
Yeah, I mean, well, like for me now, I live in like a sober living community, but like it's all God all the time. And I don't like the word trigger, but Alcoholics Anonymous is a lateral move to me to Jehovah's Witnesses. They quote they scripture, um, read from the Bible, and then they want to keep telling you it's not about God when it fundamentally is. I despise God. I despised hearing about him. I am an ardent atheist. I do not even care. Even if Jehovah God is the real God, I do not care. You are a failure. And there's a picture I like. I think it was, I don't know if they know that a Jew wrote it, but on a wall in Auschwitz, I believe it says, if there is a God, they will have to plead for my forgiveness, something like that. That's very much how I view it. I do see my son once a week, but like, to lose absolutely everything you love, to be divorced during that period, to be discarded by I mean, that's fine. That's what they can do. But like, I think a lot of people do get, at least they get to leave with their family or their kids. And some people don't. I mean, the harsh reality is people in cults are thrown into a world that they have been trained to fear, that does not understand them, that they do not understand. And I do have people who are supportive, but every time I talk to them, there is a massive chasm between us. I don't think they perceive it, but I do. I It's like I came out of the Matrix. I just don't fit in. I don't belong anywhere. And the only place, like the only real community is like, ex Jehovah's Witnesses. And I don't know. It's hard too sometimes when I think about like, why did I write this book? Sometimes I don't know. I mean, there were reasons. There were multi things, but I don't know. Sometimes I just hope somebody will be like, well, I don't have it as bad as this guy. I mean, and I'm not trying to, win the pain Olympics and be like, I have the worst life. That's not a title I want or anything, but like, I don't know. It's really difficult. It's really difficult. Like, I don't know. I wanted it to be true. I wanted my mother to love me for who I was, and she never did. And it's a really horrible thing to realize. If my dad was alive, he probably wouldn't care about me either. I mean, I don't know. The one thing I think is, at least I published a book that's immortality, because that's out there in the world forever, and people are going to keep leaving Jehovah's Witnesses. And my son will always have that. And I claimed what they promised, so I like to think of that. But it's just hard because there's just 10 million little things throughout the day. It just makes you realize, I don't know, just that you're awkward and strange and don't fit in. And you have to confront those things, the first time you celebrate a birthday, but it's really hard to find community as well that understands. People forget because that's not their life and they have their own problems. But you're so stunted in many ways, it's hard trying to play catch up. And a lot of people don't want to deal with it. It's uncomfortable. You know, it's very difficult to find your place. It really is.
I've heard it described sometimes as being infantilized, and the group that the dependency that you spoke about earlier, it creates that almost inability to make decisions for yourself, to navigate life without the community that is fostered by the high demand religious group, which creates that infantilizing of members so that they don't know how to be independent. And so or to make grown up and rational decisions. But I think that your book is wonderfully written. I think it's an incredible resource for individuals, not only waking up or hoping to wake up, people that left ages ago, but even just for individuals like myself who were never a part of the Jehovah's Witnesses to understand it from a different perspective. Like you said, you've written a book now, so you leave a legacy in the world forever. And it will continue to be an education for people if they find a way to get a hold of it and read it, because in these high demand religious groups, that can be a difficult task in itself. But I am really thankful that I got to sit down with you today and have this conversation, because in some alternate universes, maybe that wouldn't have been the case. You've mentioned the
Yeah.
XJW community. Do you feel like there are people within that community that you could reach out to if your well-being was taken a significant dive?
Yeah, I mean, there are people. I mean, I'm a stubborn person. I mean, and it's hard to like for me, the Twitter has been my favorite place to interact with other XJWs. I also have Instagram and TikTok and Reddit. But for me personally, I know sometimes people on Reddit have gotten really angry when I would talk about in the past saying like I'm feeling really suicidal. And one time somebody got real mad at me and said I should have put a trigger warning. And I mean, that didn't occur to me. I didn't even really realize that was a thing. But also, it's like, when you're having those feelings, they're not rational. Like everyone else in the world, if they told me they were gonna end their life, I would be like, oh, well, I don't think that's good. Would you like to talk about it? But when you feel those things inside, they feel so unique and they feel so true that it's just a different thing. I mean, it is hypocrisy, I guess, kind of in a sense, but it's just really difficult, because when you think for so long that the fact that you don't fit in this religion is evidence that you're evil and deserve death, it's hard to not just want that because it feels like destiny. It's, I mean, they even say apostates. I mean, when I was a believer, you believe that they like reject God and they want to serve Satan and die and want everyone else to like follow them and die. And it's like these really delusional things. But you believe them, and it can really be a lot when or when you see people and they they think that about you, and it's just difficult. And like the new year when that happened, that was the first time I realized like I really thought about the last year and what had happened, and then I thought about the coming year, but I never did that before because it was always just Armageddon's coming. That's all you think about. And then I spoke with a YouTuber and he put our discussion online on January 11th, which was my mom's birthday, which really, really affected me. I really had no idea it would, but I realized I'm never going to celebrate a parent's birthday. It's just really difficult. And one thing that I think helps is, I never feel like I'm doing enough. Every single day, it's like, ugh. But sometimes if expand out, like, well, the past week or the past month, that helps, but like, I don't know. It's just really difficult. I want to leave behind. I want my son to know me. That's the most important thing. I don't know my dad, and I realize that I have no idea who raised me. My mother, I don't know who that is. I realize everything I thought was true is wrong. I have no idea who she is. And so I have a second book and a third book that are also in the works. So I I
That's
have a
huge. Oh my goodness, 2 books
yeah.
after this one. Yeah, that's significant, isn't it? Oh my goodness.
Well, and so my plan is 6 months after the after mentally diseased, I've always written poetry, and in my book, before each chapter, there's a poem.
Yes, I
Because
love that.
art, thank you. Art is the safe way to confront things. I can make a painting about feeling despondent, hurt, suicidal, whatever, and that was safe. Same, I could write, and kind of be vague. So I have 100 poems that I did not put in the first book that I wrote from the age of 18 to 38. And so I've already found another XJW to paint or to design me for the cover of that, because the first cover is made by Sarah Riches, I think. She's Australian, she's an XJW. And the moment I saw her art, I just loved it. And I was
I
like,
love
that's
that
what I want
cover
for the
art.
cover.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's really talented. She does some really cool stuff on old publications too. It's really cool. And so then the second artist, we met last week and we hung out, and it was weird to their upbringing was their parents were mostly disfellowshipped and they moved around a lot, but they experienced like the profound isolation. And it was really weird how a lot of our quirks were the same. Like I immediately felt like I knew her. It, I, it was really bizarre. And because I'm not uncomfortable, but I'm just, most of the time when I'm around people, I'm like, yeah, I'd rather not. I'd rather be elsewhere. It's just, I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. And but she makes really beautiful art, so she's going to design the cover for my second book, which I'm going to call Gangrenous Speeches, which is another Watchtower phrase. And then my third book, because I always loved like horror movies, heavy metal, and I was always told like that was satanic, and so I just want to write a really messed up like novella, where like a character essentially becomes a member of the ruling council of the one true religion and becomes the antichrist. And once he realizes how corrupt they are, he just during COVID, like it's very much about Jehovah's Witnesses, but it will be fictional. But I hope it'll be transgressive. Like I want to deal with a lot of the really dark, ugly aspects, and I don't know, maybe that'll be cathartic, maybe not, but I want to call that one Despicable. And I found a third XJW artist who is going to paint me for the cover.
Wow.
So,
I love that.
it,
It's like you're creating your own community made up of former members of your former community.
well, yeah, I mean, I think they really do need each other. And also, I just like the idea of, people understand, because you also have some of the younger people that they're like, oh, well, I researched stuff when I was 8 years old on the internet and I saw through it immediately. And those people just don't understand what it is to have that absolute faith. Because, I couldn't go to the library or risk asking for a book, you know. So I was in it for nearly 4 decades, and to lose that was staggering. It was an existential crisis. I had to go through every single aspect of my life and every belief, and and say, do I really think this? Is this what I believe, or is this because of Watchtower? You know, it's they say that some events are so big they change your DNA. I read that once, and I really feel like it was a slower process, but you know, it it's just it's really unique. And I've talked to ex-Mormons, and it's like, oh yeah, I understand, you understand, be if you haven't gone through it. And it's not that it's fun or that you want to claim it, and so many people do try and help, but it's really, really difficult. Most people do not grow up thinking they will be immortal. They just don't. And so if that truly exists in your head and you lose it, It's really, really difficult. But I do think it makes you feel beauty in so many small things that other people just, like if somebody sneezes, I'll be like, oh, God bless you, because I could never say that. And it's like, it feels like, I don't know, it feels slightly rebellious. And I just never said it for 40 years. So it's new. Like it's really weird because you're on a journey, but it's also really crappy when it's just you on the journey because you have no one for the bad times and no one for the good times. It's a difficult thing.
I think that's what's so beautiful about the XJW subreddit as well, because people post in there about their first tattoos and their birthdays and going out and buying their first Christmas tree and going out trick or treating with their children for Halloween. There's a lot of firsts that are posted in that subreddit.
Uh-huh.
And these firsts are typically from fully grown adults um who are expressing, their excitement for having these firsts. And I remember seeing your post where you were like, hey, this is me, I've changed my username, I was this person, but now I'll go public with who I am on the day that my book's being released. And I just think that that's incredible. To have two more books in the works as well, almost like a collaborative project with you and other former members of the Jehovah's Witnesses as well. I think that's amazing. There's so many different amazing artists that are putting work out on work that's inspired by their experiences and their recovery, and also assisting and aiding in recovery as well. There's your poetry, there's Natalie Grand's graphic novel Cult Girls. There's so many
Yeah.
different ways that people are educating and recovering, and the artistry that is involved in that is absolutely incredible. I was supposed to go on Stephen Mather's show Cult Hackers the other day and actually talk about what guests have talked about in terms of their recovery and what strategies they use. And the big bulk of my sort of conversation with him was going to be focused around different artistic outlets that people have adopted or are focusing on since leaving their groups. Because as you said, like, God forbid you have a hobby when you're in a high demand
Yeah.
religious
Well,
group.
yeah. It all has to serve the group. Yeah. And if it takes away time, you can be an artist if you make illustrations for Watchtower, of angels preparing to murder families. That's okay. But, to be a professional artist, no. And that's that's one thing I always hated. It strips the individuality and the identity from members, but it also robs you of your time and so many hobbies. And yeah, I always loved art. I also make abstract paintings. And drawings. The first time I was disfellowshipped, I had an opportunity to try stand-up comedy. And so I did. And I still have the flyer somewhere. And it was, now of course I was PG PG 13 because I was trying to get reinstated. But everything I read, it said be prepared to fail. And so I was like, okay, because how many people can say they've done that? Like
I could
I
never
always
do that.
wanted to do that.
I'd be terrified to do that. I'd be
And
like, oh no.
well, I always kind of, we went to visit Bethel when I was about 10, and my dad went up in the World Trade Center and wanted me to go up, and I was afraid of heights and I didn't go. And like 3 years later, he was dead. And then that building got destroyed, so I couldn't even go back up there and feel. And I always regretted that. That's one of my biggest regrets. So I've always, even as a JW, I tried to, if I wanted to do something, if it was, I would do it. And so I mean, I don't think I'm an inspiration or anything like that, but I do hope maybe I can encourage people to embrace what they want to do, because nobody wants to be a critic. No little kid says, you know what I want to do? I want to criticize other people's work. Nobody wants that. People want to make art and affect people or make people laugh. That's what people want. And I just think that's one of the most beautiful things about life, because I've had people reach out to me, and one person told me they read part of my book. Sorry, and they said it's like you're reading the words. out of my head. And like to know that you affect someone like that is really powerful, you know? Like, I don't know, that means a lot to me. Because Jehovah's Witnesses that leave, they just go through immense suffering. And people, people always say congratulations on getting out, which they mean well, but more than likely they didn't want to get out. They wanted it to be true. They want their family back, but they can't go back. I cannot go back to a place that protects pedophiles. I cannot do that. And I also cannot save the people that I love because they think I serve Satan, So that's just, it's really difficult, but it is nice to connect with people, and for them to, I mean, I don't know. And my editor, Moses, who I love that his name is biblical, but he really elevated my writing. And I told him too, I said I want to be brutally honest in this. I don't want it to read as angry, and I would like it to be something that could potentially translate into like a movie or a Netflix series, because not for my glory, but Scientology has been exposed, Mormonism, but Jehovah's Witnesses, for the most part, people don't know that much about. And because they really hide how ugly they are. Like when I met with Moses, I said, I want you to know I used to pray to my God for him to kill you. I said, and I don't mean that as an insult, but to dress it up would be a disservice, because that's what you're doing.
The fact that you're writing, well, you've written a book, that's a huge accomplishment in itself. To have
Thank you.
the discipline to sit down and to the ability to sit down and write a full length memoir is is an incredible accomplishment. But then also to have that effect on individuals, I would say that that is inspiring, and I would say that you are an inspiration. You said no one wants to be a critic. You have put yourself in the position of being a critic and also exposing wrongdoings that are going on in the world, which can't be denied because they're your personal experiences. So, it's not like you can say, I think
Yeah.
this is happening. You can say, I know this happens because it has happened to me. And I think that there's going to be a huge need for more material like this in the future, in the near future, because there's like a reckoning that is happening with those born and raised in cults, and them coming forward to talk about their lives, which significantly differ from those that join high demand groups later in life. We're
Yeah.
seeing those voices come forward now because those children that were born and raised, they're now adults, and they're taking back that narrative, they're taking back that power, and they're putting content out in the world that stops these groups from being able to hide behind these carefully curated
Mm-hmm.
images that they're putting out into the public. And you have done that with your book, because you said that you weren't going to hold any punches, and that's exactly what you've done. And I mentioned it's really well written. The poetry at the start of each chapter, I really really enjoyed that. The first poem, I thought, oh, I wonder who wrote that. Like some writers, they put quotes or poems or
Oh,
segments
yeah.
from other writers, and I was like, oh, and then I was like, it's Micah's poem. And then I was like, there's one at the start of every chapter. So it really is a powerful thing, mentally diseased. And I would love for you to tell the listeners where they can find a copy of that book today.
Okay. You can find Mentally Diseased. It is available on Amazon. The digital paperback and hardcover is on there, and it is also on barnesandnoble.com. I'm still reaching out to distributors, some locally. Sometimes people get real uncomfortable when they'll say, well, what is your book about? And I'll say, well, I was in the world's largest doomsday cult. And they're like, oh, okay. Well, I'll pass on your information, but it is available online. You can, some people said they couldn't find Mentally Diseased when they typed it in on Amazon, but if you look up Micah Losh, the book is, I think, the first thing that pops up. So,
And I will absolutely put a link in the episode description to the book so that people can go and find a copy if they would like to do so. And will you keep us updated with any news on your other two publications as well?
Yeah, definitely. Like I said, I have the second one, it's compiled and formatted. I'm just waiting on the artist, and I want to do that one 6 months after. So I think that's June 10th. And then I'm hoping the third one, which I'm going to call Despicable, I'm still kind of working with it, and I'm kind of playing with what exactly I want to do, but I'm hoping to do that a year to the day after my first one. So, you know, I put my book for my son. I challenged a cult for him, you know. So yeah, I would very much like my son to have access to three things I've written and to know his dad put out three books in a year because I mean he's everything.
That's incredible. I will make sure that we share the updates with the listeners so that we can all join in your journey through putting three books out in the world in a very short amount of time. I think I need to take some inspiration from you and stop procrastinating so much. Yeah, I think, oh, maybe I should do some writing, or maybe I should just sit here and watch this film. I need to channel some inner Micah, I think. But thank you
Yep.
so much for your time today, for coming and sharing your
Yeah.
story with us, for your brutal honesty, and for the time, effort, and energy that it takes to put a book out in the world that can help us to understand not only your personal experience, but also the Jehovah's Witnesses and the destructive organization that they are.
No worry. Thank you for having me, Casey. I really appreciate it.
Take care, Micah. Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye.